Ukraine just suffered one of the deadliest Russian attacks on Kyiv this year. But this time, the story does not end in rubble, sirens, and mourning. It may be the beginning of a much bigger shift. Russia launched hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles at Ukraine's capital. Apartment buildings were torn open. Families were buried under debris. Kyiv declared a day of mourning. But while Putin tried to show power, Ukraine is sending a different message. The war will no longer stay safely outside Russia's borders. Kyiv is now hitting deep inside Russia: oil refineries, fuel systems, military-linked infrastructure, and the supply lines that keep Putin's war machine moving. So the real question tonight is not only what Russia did to Kyiv. The attack on Kyiv was not a small strike. It was a massive Russian barrage, launched overnight with missiles and drones designed to overwhelm Ukraine's air defenses. For hours, explosions shook the capital. Smoke rose over residential districts. Families rushed into shelters and metro stations. Rescue workers searched through concrete, glass, and twisted metal, looking for survivors. Ukraine says Russia fired dozens of missiles and nearly 500 drones. The damage was spread across the city. Residential buildings, emergency facilities, and civilian infrastructure were hit. This is why the attack matters. Russia was not simply trying to hit one target. Moscow was trying to send a message to Kyiv, to NATO, and to Washington. Russia can still punish Ukraine's capital whenever it wants, but that message has a weakness. Every time Russia launches a massive attack on Kyiv, Ukraine gets more political momentum to ask for stronger air defenses, deeper strike capability, and faster Western support. That is the part Putin cannot control. Because the images from Kyiv do not only show Russian power, they also show why Ukraine keeps demanding Patriot systems, long-range weapons, and permission to hit the infrastructure behind Russia's war. Ukraine's response is changing. Earlier in the war, the world mostly saw Ukraine as defending cities, holding trenches, and asking for more weapons. But now Kyiv is trying to reshape the war by striking the systems Russia depends on. Ukraine has increased long-range attacks deep inside Russian territory. The targets are not random. Kyiv is focusing heavily on oil refineries, fuel depots, logistics hubs, and military infrastructure. That matters because Russia's war does not run only on tanks and missiles. It runs on fuel, transport, repair networks, money, and public control. When Ukraine hits oil refineries, it is not just creating fireballs for television. It is trying to damage the supply chain behind Putin's offensive. And this is where the story becomes dangerous for Moscow. Reports now describe fuel shortages and rationing inside Russia. Some drivers are waiting in long lines. Some regions are struggling with supply. Crimea, which Russia illegally annexed in 2014, has reportedly faced some of the worst fuel pressure. That is a strategic problem for Putin. For years, the Kremlin tried to keep ordinary Russians emotionally distant from the war. The battlefield was supposed to be something happening over there, in Ukraine. But Ukraine's long-range campaign is bringing the cost of war back home, and that changes the psychology of the conflict. Putin's biggest problem is not only that Ukraine is hitting back. His bigger problem is that Ukraine is hitting the kind of targets Russia cannot easily hide. A destroyed tank can be explained away. A failed offensive can be buried in propaganda. But fuel shortages are harder to hide when people are standing in line at gas stations. This is why Ukraine's strategy is so important. Kyiv understands that Russia has more manpower, more missiles, and more territory. So Ukraine is not trying to mirror Russia strike for strike. It is using asymmetric pressure. That means hitting weaker points in Russia's system: refineries, logistics, military production, and critical supply routes. This does not mean Ukraine has suddenly won the war. That would be false. Russia still holds large areas of Ukrainian territory. Russian forces are still attacking along the front. Moscow still has a huge missile and drone arsenal, but the balance is changing in one key way. Ukraine is proving that Russia's rear areas are no longer fully safe. For Putin, that creates a difficult choice. If he escalates strikes on Ukrainian cities, Ukraine may escalate strikes on Russian infrastructure. If he ignores the strikes, he looks weaker. If he overreacts, he risks pulling the war into an even more unstable phase. That is the trap. Putin wanted Kyiv to feel pressure. The Kyiv attack also puts pressure on Ukraine's allies. Zelensky has repeatedly asked for stronger air defenses, especially systems capable of stopping ballistic missiles. After this latest strike, that request becomes harder for Western leaders to ignore. For Ukraine, air defense is not just about protection, it is about survival. If Kyiv cannot stop Russian missiles, then Russia can keep using terror from the sky to drain Ukraine's economy, exhaust civilians, and force political pressure on the government. This is where NATO and the United States become central. Ukraine wants faster air defense deliveries. It wants more interceptors. It wants more ability to defend cities and energy infrastructure. And it wants long-range tools to make Russian attacks more costly. For President Trump, this creates a serious diplomatic test. Trump wants to present himself as someone who can end the war, but every massive Russian attack makes a quick peace deal harder. It strengthens Ukraine's argument that Putin is not negotiating seriously. It also raises the question, can any ceasefire work if Russia keeps using missile barrages as pressure? That is why this moment matters. The war is no longer only about territory on the map. It is about whether Russia can bomb Ukraine into concessions or whether Ukraine can make the cost of that strategy too high for Moscow. And right now, Ukraine is trying to prove the second option. The next move may decide how dangerous this phase becomes. Ukraine will likely keep pushing for more air defense, more sanctions on Russia, and more freedom to strike military and energy targets behind Russian lines. Russia, meanwhile, may continue large missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities, hoping to break morale and show that Moscow still controls the tempo of the war. But here is the key point. Russia's attack on Kyiv may have backfired politically. Instead of frightening Ukraine into silence, it may increase support for Ukraine's long-range campaign. It gives Kyiv a powerful argument. If Russia can strike Ukrainian cities from a distance, then Ukraine must be able to strike the systems that enable those attacks. This is why the phrase long-range sanctions is gaining attention. It means Ukraine is using drones and missiles like a military form of pressure, not just to destroy targets, but to force Russia to feel the consequences of continuing the war. The danger is escalation. If Ukraine keeps hitting Russian refineries, Russia may respond with even larger attacks on cities. If Russia keeps hitting civilians, Ukraine may push even deeper into Russian territory. That is how wars enter new phases. Not through one dramatic announcement, but through repeated actions that slowly change the rules. And after Kyiv's deadliest attack this year, the rules may already be changing. So here is the real takeaway. Putin wanted this Kyiv attack to look like strength, but it may expose something else. Russia can still hurt Ukraine, but it cannot stop Ukraine from reaching deep into Russia's war machine. That is why this moment is so important. Ukraine is no longer only asking the world to help it survive. It is showing Moscow that every attack on Kyiv can come with a cost inside Russia itself. This does not mean the war is ending tomorrow, but it does mean Putin's strategy is becoming more expensive, more risky, and harder to control. The battlefield is no longer only in eastern Ukraine. It is now in the skies over Kyiv, the fuel lines inside Russia, and the political decisions being made in Washington, Brussels, and Moscow. If you think Ukraine's deep strikes are changing the direction of this war, hit like and comment below. Do you think Putin will respond with even bigger attacks? Or will Ukraine's pressure force him closer to negotiations? Subscribe for clear geopolitical breakdowns without the noise, because this war is entering a new phase, and what happens next could shape not only Ukraine's future, but the future of Europe.